This is Radar on the Renter Entertain blog, coming to you with an observation video of the first half of the 2021-22 NBA season. Being a local person, it's been great. The Bulls at one point had a huge lead in the Eastern Conference. They were so good in the first couple months. They've been a surprise. The moves they made, I was like, cool. They got DeMar DeRozan, the king of the mid-range, who's been an all-star, has been in the playoffs, so Zach LaVine doesn't have to do it all. They get Lonzo Ball, so the Bulls have their first real point guard since Derrick Rose. And even Derrick Rose was more of a scoring guard like an Allen Iverson more than an actual passing point guard. Then they got Alex Caruso, who reminded me of Andres Nocioni, where he comes off the bench, he can guard any of the position, he's just out there to hustle, and that's what the Bulls had. Javonte Green's development when they got him previously, he's like a baby Dennis Rodman. Then you just add to the fact that the Io dropped all the way, not in the first round, but all the way in the second round. Kobe White's healthy, and he's scoring, and they're both playing well, and they're like, wow, the Bulls are great. And Derrick Jones Jr. was good off the bench for them, and it was just going well. And then at first, Patrick Williams gets hurt to start the season. Lonzo Ball and Caruso get hurt. Caruso gets hurt twice. There's COVID, so DeMar, Zach, and Lonzo missed time, so they were in the COVID pro. So was Nikola Vukovic, and he's finally figured out how he's playing. So the Bulls are surprised. I thought the Bulls would try to squeeze into somewhere between 6th and 8th, and if you're not in that 6th spot, then you're in the play-in game. That's what I thought the Bulls were going to be. But they surprised me how quick they gelled, how Ball, Caruso, and Javonte Green, them playing hard on defense, everybody, even Zach LaVine and Vucevic were playing better defense. Vucevic's not a great shot blocker, great defensive player, nor is Zach LaVine, but if a team is going out there, like if your starting player, Lonzo Ball, he's a starting point guard, he's out there, Javonte Green's starting at power forward, even though he's undersized, they're the starters and they're playing like that, then you can't have no excuse not to play like that. So they've been surprised in that way. I know Billy Donovan's been a great coach before in college and in the professional. So for him, I was like, wow, the Bulls got a professional coach together. So they surprised me for having the first seed pretty much most of the season, and then now they're tied for first place in the thing. That's been a surprise. Not that they've been good, but how good they've been. And just imagine if Caruso and Ball are back, and they get enough playing time in before the playoffs, and now that they got Tristan Thompson off the bench, and the way that Vucevic, Kobe White, and Io are playing, it makes this team so much better. That's a surprise. I am surprised Miami's also in first place because Bam Adebayo has missed a lot of time due to injury. A lot of their team has missed a lot of injury, and they also had a lot of COVID protocols, and they just ride at the ship because Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra are famous of second-round picks, undrafted players, overseas players, late first-round picks. So they got all these guys on their roster, and you're just like, who and what are these players, man? Like, obviously we know Jimmy Butler. Them getting Kyle Lowry's been good because they get a real point guard to facilitate. They did lose Kendrick Nunn, but Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson have both been playing great. And this team has been a surprise how good they have been. Because nobody's ever heard of this Marcus Garrett, Kyle Guy, Haywood Highsmith, Eric Holman, Caleb Martin, Javonte Smart, Gabe Vincent, Omer Brewston. Like, we've heard of P.J. Tucker. He's been around the block. Nick Stauskas has been around the block. And Victor Oladipo, we know him to have been a pretty good player. But Caleb Martin and this Gabe Vincent and Max Strauss and Omer Yurtseven, a lot of these guys nobody ever heard of, and they just come in and played really, really well. Then you look at the fact that the 76ers, who I thought would not be a playoff team because without Ben Simmons, it's just Joel Embiid on an island. But Joel Embiid has proven me and everybody wrong that he's a top 5 player in this league, that he can win potentially MVP, and that's how they're a top seed in the East. Now, they just got James Harden, so that may take away from how much I think the Sixers and Embiid is a MVP if he's got another MVP player on his team alongside him. But they've been a surprise because of how good they've been with just Joel Embiid and then having guys like Tobias Harris, Seth Curry as role players. And these young guys like Maxey. And so it's just like, okay, cool. So that's been a surprise. And Cavaliers have been a surprise because they've been consistently top 5 seed this year. They have this young talent that was supposed to be Sexton and Garland. They drafted Mobley in the first round. They have Jared Allen. They got it in trade recently in the last couple of years. And Isaac Okoro, who was good last year. And then Rajon Rondo and Kevin Love have been great off the bench. Before then, Ricky Rubio was that great backup guard off the bench playing defense, but he got hurt. They traded him. And Colin Sexton got hurt. who was playing really well. So imagine next year if Colin Sexton is healthy, with this Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Isaac Okoro, Jared Allen, Kevin Love mix, and they just got themselves Karis LeVert, who's finally healthy and playing really well for Indiana. He got traded there. This team may not win a championship this year, but they definitely are going the right direction, and that's a surprise because the Cavaliers, when LeBron left the first time, they were so bad. They had all these first-round picks. Kyrie Irving, Deion Waiters, Anthony Bennett, a Zeller brother. They just had a lot of guys who were drafted in the first round because they were that bad. Then LeBron came back, and he was like, I don't want Wiggins. I don't want all these young guys out of here. And, of course, then they won a championship because they got Kevin Love, and they got other veterans like Channing Frye and Richard Jefferson to come in. And then he left, and they were bad. So, and, of course, Kyrie was traded away, and Kevin Love decided to stay. But it is a surprise that their top thing. I thought, man, Detroit and them are going to be bad for years. And then the Celtics, people are like, oh, they're the most disappointing team in the league. But right now they're the 6th seed, and every team that is in the 1 through 8, they're separated by 7 games. It's not a lot. It's not a huge difference there. And they're the same thing. Tatum and Brown, are they good or not? Marcus Smart, if he's healthy. Do they have enough big men on this team? Because they got Al Horford. Now they got rid of Ennis Cannon. They got Daniel Tice. They got Derek White, so that's better. But they had Dennis Schroeder, so they're just swapping the deck chairs of who's the point guard and who's one of the center. So it's always the same thing. They're going to be streaky because Tatum and Brown are similar players, like Bradley Beal and Wall, like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. So, they're both wing players, and that's why I don't know if they're a championship-caliber team, but they're just a good team. So that's not surprising that they're a playoff team. The Bucks are still the same team because as long as you have Giannis Middleton and Drew Holiday and Bobby Portis and Brooke Lopez, and now they got Serge Ibaka, and they got Pat Connaughton, and they like Grayson Allen, who I don't like anymore after what he did Caruso. They still got that team of size and length, and they still got Giannis, one of the best players in the league. So that's not surprising that they've fluctuated somewhere in the first 5 or 6 seeds. And then the Raptors, I thought they were bad because Pascal Siakam has been not great the last couple of years. Kyle Lowry's now gone. Serge Ibaka and Gasol are gone, so they didn't have the veterans up at center. And you're like, okay, so Fred VanVleet, it's his time to be the starting point guard. Well, he had an all-star year. That's surprising. Gary Trent Jr., who traded for Norman Powell, he's been going off, getting 30, 40 points. And, of course, they got all these big, lengthy guys. They got, Scotty Barnes. They got Precious Achiuwa in that trade. They're just going out there with all these lanky, taller dudes who may not be 7 feet tall because of their length and their versatility. They don't need a center. They can go in and out playing all these big guys, and it's been working well enough, those guys. And then you have OG Anunoby and Gary Trent scoring with Fred VanVleet. That made this team wow, this is a playoff team. And you don't want to face them in the playoffs because of all their length and versatility. So they're a surprise because I thought, man, they're not a playoff team this year. Who the heck cares? And then nobody would have thought the Nets would have been this bad. Now, obviously, Kyrie's only playing part-time. Kevin Durant and Joe Harris have both been hurt. They don't have a real center because LaMarcus Aldridge, Paul Millsap, and Blake Griffin are not centers. There's no power forwards in the game anymore. And James Harden doesn't always look the same player. Maybe he's not the most healthiest. He's not the most in shape. There's been things about that. The foul calling, but he did not like being there with Kyrie Irving, and they couldn't trade Kyrie Irving, so they trade James Harden to get Ben Simmons. So getting Seth Curry to go along with the way that Patty Mills is playing this year, they got 2 great guards that can score, and Joe Harris. That's 3 good three-point shooters. And they get Andre Drummond. That's a real center. The dude's not even 30 yet, and people wrote him off because of how big men are no longer part of the game. That's going to help them out defensively and rebounding. And when Kevin Durant comes back from injury, I don't think the Nets are going to be the ace seed. I think they're going to jump up maybe past the Celtics. That would be something. But yeah, it's a surprise in the first half that they're an 8 seed. But, with James Harden forced away on, Kyrie playing part-time and Durant injured, you could see that happening. And now, then you look at Atlanta, who made the playoffs last year, and they were a top 6 or 7 seed, and you're like, wow. And the Knicks made the playoffs, and they were a top 5 seed too, and you're like, wow. So I was like, maybe the Bulls could be just slightly better than the Hawks and the Knicks. Looks like the Knicks are completely cratered, and they're not the same team. They have a bunch of guys, and they traded for the guy Cam Reddish, and they're not using him. Julius Randle's been playing well, but this team does not look like the same team that it was. RJ Barrett kind of doesn't look like the same player he was. So the Knicks are surprised that they're this bad. Now, obviously, when Thibodeau coached the Bulls may not have been the number 1 seed, but they were a playoff team pretty much every year. Minnesota only made 1 year because they didn't have as much talent as the Bulls did. But the thing is, the Knicks, I thought, have enough talent that they're a playoff team. I just didn't think, obviously, they can win that much. And of course, they were losing to like the Atlanta Hawks in the playoffs and stuff like that. So surprised that the Hawks are not a playoff team. They traded Cam Reddish to the Knicks. The Knicks are this bad despite having a lot of talent on this team and Thibodeau being a good coach. I don't know what happened there. And then look at the Wizards. The Wizards were like a top 5 seed in the first month or two of the season. Then they dropped. Bradley Beal's hurt. He had surgery. He's out for the year. They trade away Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie, who I thought was a great addition at point guard. They get Ish Smith and they get Porzingis. I guess the Wizards are definitely, again, going to be back to where they have been since all those injuries happened to John Wall and him and the whole bringing Westbrook and all this other stuff. They're no longer going to be that team that creeps in at the 9th or 10th seed and be in a playing game. They're going down. The Wizards are not going to be a playoff team this year or for a while. And sorry for Bradley Beal. And then the Pacers, I look at the Pacers coming into the season. You got Miles Turner, could be an all-star, one of the top centers in the league. Sabonis is an all-star at the top power forward in this league. And then T.J. Warren and T.J. McConnell and T.J. Leaf, all these T.J.s were good off the bench with Lamb. They got a good role player. And then you had Malcolm Brogdon at point guard, and you had Karis LeVert was finally healthy, and he was playing great. And I'm like, that's a great team. Then they drafted this Duarte guy who was the #1 shooting guard in all of college last year. And I'm like, wow, they're going places. Rick Carlisle's here after they made a mistake of firing Nate McMillan and bringing in a guy who had never been a head coach in the professionals, and that didn't work out. Well, guess what? The Pacers have been so bad that they wanted the whole entire team up for sale. And it was like, okay, cool. So they've already traded away Sabonis and Karis LeVert. They're like, why would you get Karis LeVert? He's a young guy. Well, nobody knew that they were going to get Tyrese Halliburton, who's been great with the King, Buddy Hield, who every contending team wants. And yeah, they got Tristan Thompson to throw in, and then they made some other trades where they traded some of their other guys, and they got some guys back for the bench. So it was like, okay. And they got a bunch of draft picks. I think next year, full season of Halliburton, Buddy Hield, if he is not an impending free agent, Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner, I think that this team will go back to the playoffs. But right now, I don't know what's going on. That's surprising. They're not good. Because Indiana's not like a championship team, but even when they had Paul George and they had other players beforehand, like, we're not talking about Reggie Miller team. We're just talking about Danny Granger and Paul George. They're just good enough playoff teams to be a top 7 seed. But I guess something's wrong there, even with Rick Carlisle not being the thing. And then, of course, I knew the Pistons and the Magic were going to be bad because guess what? The Pistons had the first pick in the draft. They have a bunch of young guys like Stewart and Sadiq Bey who made the Rising Star game with Cade Cunningham. They just got Marvin Bagley, which makes no sense because they already have a center in Stewart. And Jeremy Graham has been a pretty good player for them. So that's why they're bad. And the Magic, they have their first-round pick. Their Jalen was a first-round pick. They had Cole Anthony. They were still waiting for Jonathan Isaacs and Markelle Fultz and all these other young guys that they have coming back. Mo Bamba and Wendell Carter are young guys. They got the Von Wagner and Maurice Wagner brothers. So, like, they're mostly a rebuilding team, and that makes sense because they're not really going anywhere. And then when you get to the West, I am surprised the Suns are still this team because some teams, when they lose in the championship game, they're not always going to come back. But they're this good. Now, Chris Paul is now going to be out for a bit of time, and Cameron Payne, nobody ever thought you'd be relying on him. But this team still has Jay Crowder, Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker. I don't know what's going on, why they're not using Dario Saric. They're not trading. They haven't traded for him. JaVale McGee's been great off the bench. They cut Abdul Nader, which I'm upset about. So it's like, I don't know how they're going to maintain that #1 seed without Chris Paul. The Warriors, I am surprised they're this good because Clay didn't come back until recently. Draymond Green has been out. But there's Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, and they haven't got James Wiseman back as well. He's been out. But Poole and Kuminga and Wiggins blossoming into an all-star this year and being an NBA starter and being the third best player on this team because when Clay's there, it's Clay and then him and then Green. So imagine it when Draymond Green is healthy with Klay Thompson, Wiggins is playing the way he has been with James Wiseman and Poole and Kuminga and Hernan Gomez and all these other players. They could sneak up and get the #1 seed. I thought the Warriors would just go back to being, okay, they're a playoff team. Clay's back. Wiggins is playing well. Wiseman is going to develop. They're going to be a top, 6th seed. I would never thought they would have been a #2 seed. So that is interesting. And then Memphis, they were like the guy in the bubble. They were good. They were in the play-in tournament. Then they've been like an 8th seed. But the fact that they're a top 5 seed, top 3 seed right now, that is surprising because, John Morant missed a lot of time, and they still were great. This Jaren Jackson Jr., Jonas Valanciunas, they've been playing, Steven Adams has been playing really well with them, and Desmond Bane has been playing really well, and he was a rising star. And that's what happened. Memphis is similar to the Spurs, where they get guys that you never heard of, or they're just like guys who are second round picks or undrafted guys, and you're like, okay, what's going to happen here? And they just turn out to be great players. They got former Spur Kyle Anderson, that's a guy on their team. Then that's been good. And Desmond Bane, as I said, has been great. Dylan Brooks, nobody's ever heard of him. Brandon Clark, the same thing. Jared Culver. They got Tyus Jones, who's one of the Jones brothers. DeAnthony Melton. They got Zaire Williams. They got a lot of guys that you're like, okay, nobody's ever heard of them, but they're like always, the Grizzlies are a team that always gels as a team. Despite having Mike Conley, Gasol, Zebo, Tony Allen, Rudy Gay, and O.J. Mayo at certain times, like, Memphis just gets that team. They grind it out, grindhouse, they play defense, they're great. I just didn't think that, wow, that's a top 4 seed. I don't know how many rounds of playoffs you're going to win, but that is just impressive. And then the Jazz, they're similar to the Celtics. It's the same thing. You got Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, they're both all-stars. Mike Conley's made the team once when he's been there. Guys like Bogdanovich and Joe Ingles are good role players. Jordan Clarkson's 6th man of the year, but they don't have a lot of depth, and they don't have a lot of like exciting players off the bench. So I was like, okay, cool. And then, of course, Bogdanovich gets hurt, and they dump him, and they go get themselves Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which I think is good because it doesn't just help them out this year. They get a young, exciting player who, if he anywhere near his cousin, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that's going to be good for them. So if him and Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles are your 3, 4th, and 5th best players, I mean, your 4th, 5th, and 6th best players because Conley's your 3rd best player, that is how they're still in the rankings of the top 5 seed. And then I love Luka Doncic, but no offense. His team is not the type of team where I'm like, okay, they're going to be a top 5 seed, they're going to win games in the playoffs. No, they just traded Porzingis because the dude's never stayed healthy, and they get Davis Bertans, which is good because he has no problem playing the center, grabbing rebounds. He's had some injuries, but he's played through them. He's a great shooter as well. What really has been the reason for the success is Jalen Brunson is playing great. Now they get Spencer Dinwiddie, so they get a good point guard off the bench. Trey Burke and Reggie Bullock have been great role players for them with Dorian Finney-Smith, and we all know how good Tim Hardaway is at shooting. And then the combination of Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleber, and Boban has been good up front. So, like, that's the thing. None of these guys blow you away as, like, they got a number 2 or they got a number 3. They got a lot of good role players. That's the thing. So, it's a team that's built around Luka, but it really is impressive that he could be scoring at this rate, playing at this rate, and having him in the top 5 seed with nothing to support him. And then the Nuggets, you're just like, wow, Jamal Murray is not back this year so far. How are they still doing? Michael Porter's out for the year. They had Dozier, Bol, you name it. They had so many guys on this team get hurt, and they just dumped their salaries, got rid of them, and they're like, what are we going to do? Well, Jokic, who won the MVP last year, has been playing so good that I'm surprised. It's not that I'm surprised that he's an all-star starter, and they're good. It's just keeping this team afloat is surprising as the 6th seed. I always thought, based on their talent, they're a top 5 seed, but he's keeping this team afloat. Like, Aaron Gordon's been helpful. The JaMychal and Jeff Green has been helpful. But DeMarcus Cousins, role player. Will Barton, role player. Brian Forbes, role player. Nobody's ever heard of Bowen Highland, who was in the Rising Star game. Monte Morris, that's a role player. Austin Rivers, role player. It's a lot of role players. And Aaron Gordon is a role player because he's not an all-star. And you're just like, okay, how is Jokic doing it? So it's surprised that they haven't dropped all the way out of the playoffs in this tough Western Conference. And then Minnesota's good because I'm guessing finally it's been figured out. The Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell combination's finally working out. And getting the number 1 pick last year in Anthony Edwards, having it as your 3rd guy, that's a good trio. And they finally, with this good trio, figured out that they've got on this win streak that they're a chance to be in the playoffs in the play-in game. Their team isn't the greatest bench. Patrick Beverley's a good bench player. But overall, this team doesn't really have like this amazing roster outside of those 3 guys. But in the NBA, it's all about stars. So you're just like, well, okay, they got 2 guys who could both be all-stars, and they got a rising star player. And you're just like, okay, cool. And that's where I'm just like, how in the world are they this good? And I'm guessing they finally figured it out. And they're also taking advantage of the fact that like the Nuggets have been hit with injuries, and that the Warriors have been injuries, and at the same time, Lakers and Clippers are not the same team. So that's how they could be a playoff team. Because I'm just looking at the roster here, and you're like Malik Beasley, role player. Jaden McDaniels, role player. Okay, Josh Okogie, role player. Taurean Prince, role player. Jared Vanderbilt, role player. And then most of these guys I've never heard of. So it's really a testament to how good Cat and the others have been playing, and that's a surprise. The other surprise is I was right. I didn't think the Clippers would be a playoff team, but they're right now hanging to the eighth seed. Now, they may hold on to the eighth seed, or they'll have to go in the playing game, and they may lose it to somebody else, because when you don't have Kawhi Leonard all season, which looks like he's not going to come back, Paul George has missed so much time, you're not going to win with Reggie Jackson and Ivan Zubac and a Morris brother. You're not going to win with that type of roster. And the Lakers, they're the biggest shock, because I thought the Lakers would be not just a playoff team, but a top 5 team, that they would win, they would get to the final, and they were the team to beat. But yeah, looking at this Clippers roster first, Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, who they just traded for, Amir Coffey, role player. Rodney, who they traded for, role player. Luke Kennard's been a great three-point shooter, that's a role player. Terrence Mann, role player. Semi Oje and Marcus Morris Sr. and Norman Powell, who they just traded for as well, Norman Powell. They have a roster full of role players, and that's what happened before when Tobias Harris was their best player, and they were just making the playoffs, and Doc Rivers was still there, and then they're like, okay, cool. Tobias Harris gets traded to the Sixers, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, cool. The Lakers, though, we were all wrong. Russell Westbrook, as good as he is, intensity, rebounds, he needs the ball in his hand, and it does not work with LeBron James, who needs the ball in his hand. So Westbrook can't just stand on the corner and shoot three. Anthony Davis doesn't want to be a center, so he needs to be around the perimeter as a power forward. It just doesn't work together. Frank Vogel wants to play defensive intensity, have a center back down in the paint and all these other guys, but nobody wants to play that way. And that's the problem with the Lakers roster, is that they're too old, they don't fit together, and Anthony Davis keeps getting hurt, and he's going to continue to get hurt. I think just trying to run up and down the floor and play a power forward, instead of just backing down and staying in the paint and not running around. Melo's old, but at least he's a useful role player. Trevor Ariza, old role player. Kent Bazemore, old role player. Avery Bradley's a good role player. Wayne Ellington's a good three-point shooter. Dwight Howard's a good backup at this point in his career. Same thing with DeAndre Jordan. Malik Monk's played great for them. None hasn't really played, so that doesn't really factor into it. And Stanley Johnson somehow has turned out to be one of their best players this season. Taylor Horton-Tucker, he's been okay. But when you can't shoot threes in this league, it doesn't help out. So the problem is none of these players fit together. They didn't make a trade at the deadline to get rid of Westbrook, which they're going to have to do at the end of the season. They're going to have to cut all these old backup veterans and just go like, okay, we can't do this. We need to move on. Because LeBron's not getting any younger. But as I said, the Lakers are still in the 9th seed, like the Clippers in the 8th seed. They're probably going to be one of the teams, like the Timberwolves, who play for the playing game. The Trailblazers, they could be in the playing game, but they're not going to do anything because Lillard's been hurt, was having a bad year. McCollum had a collapsed lung. He's out of there. They just traded Robert Covington and Norman Powell to the Clippers. They traded away a bunch of people as well in all these trades, and you're just like, okay, draft picks and, Nickeil Alexander-Walker? No, he's going to Utah. We get an injured injured Bogdanovich. That does not help anybody, and I feel like Damian Lillard's screwed because this team could be a play-in game if they're not an actual playoff team, but without Lillard healthy and no McCollum, and you can't rely on Nurkic to stay healthy, I don't know what this team's going to do there. And then the Spurs, they're just okay. They had a gluttony of guards, but Patty Mills went to Brooklyn. They just traded Derek White. They got rid of Drew Abanks and Thaddeus Young. They got rid of some of their big men to acquire like Soroski and Goran Dragic, and they let Goran Dragic go. So that was like, what are you doing there? Just like doing silly things there. And then the Pelicans are not a playoff team because Zion Williamson is not there. And because Zion Williamson is not there, you can't really rely on it just being Brandon Ingram. Yeah, they got CJ McCollum, but he's a supporting all-star, not a leading all-star. And we've been over. Devontae Graham is not a point guard. They just traded Nickeil Alexander-Walker to get McCollum, so that and Josh Hart, so that gets away some of their role players and their bench. Valanciunas has been good for them, but not so great. Yeah, the Blazers. When you say to Damian Lillard, hey, we got Eric Bledsoe, Josh Hart, injured Oh, excuse me. I meant to say not Bogdanovich. They traded away injured Joe Ingles. My bad. Bogdanovich is still healthy with the Jazz, not Joe Ingles. My bad. So Joe Ingles is the one that got traded, and he's out for the year. So you say to Damian Lillard, Eric Bledsoe, Josh Hart, injured Joe Ingles, Keon Johnson, this D. Luzada dude, and you're just like, okay, cool. And Justice Winslow. Him having Cody Zeller, Dennis Smith Jr. and Anthony Simons, who's been playing well, Yusuf Nurkic and Ben Backlemore and Nasir Little, and they get younger guy Keon Johnson, and you're just like, okay, cool. It's not a great thing. So yeah, the Jazz. I'm sorry about that. I mix up Ingles and Bogdanovich. Having Bogdanovich, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Jordan Clarkson, and with Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert-Mitchell, that's how they're submitting. They got a good top 7 or 8 core, but outside of that, nothing. So yeah, you're saying to Damian Lillard, we get a guy who's out for the rest of the year. We get a bunch of young players, a bunch of role players, a bunch of backups, a bunch of draft picks. They're not going anywhere, and the Spurs, I don't know what they're doing. And the Pelicans, and I can tell you this, is that unless Zion Williamson plays, don't matter if they have CJ McCollum and Ingram and their team is better. By trading Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Josh Hart, I feel like it's kind of just changing things up. You get an all-star shooting guard, but then your depth is not the same. The Kings, I don't know what they're doing. Don't ask me what they're doing because it makes absolutely no sense. They had 2 disgruntled players to start the season with them, and it's not a surprise that they're a bad team because they've been a bad team for the last couple of years. But when you're disgruntled with Marvin Bagley not getting minutes because you're playing Tristan Thompson and you're playing Harrison Barnes at power forward and you're playing this Richaun Holmes as center that nobody's ever heard of in their life, and you have Alex Len on your roster and you don't play him, and it's just like, okay, Marvin Bagley wants to get out of there. But you trade him to Detroit. And what you get from Detroit is Trey Lyles, another front court big man player to add to the confusion. You get yourself Josh Jackson, who's been bouncing around from the league. It's like he's not doing anything. That's great. You then go, okay, Buddy Hield is disgruntled, and he doesn't want to be there because of Tyrese Haliburton's emergence and Davion Mitchell's emergence as guard. And you're like, okay, let's trade Buddy Hield away. But they trade Buddy Hield in the same trade that they go and trade Tyrese Haliburton, who everybody realized, man, we should have drafted him last year. How did he drop all the way down there? And the Bulls are one of the teams that, they should have done that. They should have drafted him. Because then you're looking at it, well, again, is De'Aaron Fox, is he good enough to lead a team with the likes of veteran Harrison Barnes? Now that they got themselves Dime DiVincenzo in these one of these 3-way trades, you got Mo Harkless and Justin Holiday. You got one of these trades, and Richaun Holmes and Josh Jackson, and Jeremy Lamb and Trey Lyles. I don't know. Basically, you're saying Davion Mitchell is going to be the replacement to Tyrese Haliburton, and you're telling me that Justin Holiday and DiVincenzo are going to replace Buddy Hield. I don't know if I believe that. And then you're saying Domantas Sabonis is Marvin Bagley's replacement. You clearly win that. But Sabonis in Indiana, where they've created the last 2 years, and he's their best player. So I don't really think in a tough Western Conference that Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox as your 2 best players is going to win anything. So that's where I'm like, I don't get it. Sabonis is an upgrade over Marvin Bagley. He's an upgrade over Tristan Thompson. He's an upgrade over anybody in your front court. But you give up your whole backcourt and your wing players. What are you doing? So they're going to continue to be a bad team going forward. And that's no surprise. And then the OKC and the Thunder, OKC and the Rockets, we know they're going to be bad. Thunder are not trying to win. They have a bunch of young guys like Giddey. They're just trying to play, so that's no surprise. And the Rockets, with their Jalen and Porter and Christian Wood and some of their other young players, there's no surprise. They're not playing John Wall. They don't care. Oklahoma City's not trying to play Muscala or favors any of their old guys, so it makes sense. So the biggest surprises in the West are how the Blazers be this bad, how can Minnesota be this good, and how the Clippers and Lakers could be this bad and hanging on. And the Nuggets are surprising despite having nobody except for Jokic. Luka carrying this team to a top 5 team. The Jazz, despite losing Joe Ingles, and they're getting Nickeil Alexander-Walker now, that they're still the same old story. Memphis being this good, I just thought they'd be a playoff team. The Warriors be this good, I thought they'd be a playoff team. The Suns are still this good despite now Chris Paul being injured and some things being different. Then the Eastern Conference, you're just like, what in the world happened to the Pacers? They've been cratering. And the Knicks and the Hawks, who were playoff teams last year, we thought we'd be playoff teams this year, they're not playoff teams. The Nets are this bad, and they're barely hanging on to the playoffs. And then the Raptors are good despite being bad the past couple years. That's been the issue. The Bucks and the Celtics are pretty much the same teams that we thought they were. Cavaliers, young team. I'm surprised how good they've been this year. Sixers, I'm surprised how good they've been this year, Joel Embiid, because I thought they'd be one of those teams who maybe miss the playoffs. And then I love the Bulls, but I didn't think they'd be a number one seed for 90% of the first half, almost 100%. And the Heat still also be up in the first place despite all the injuries and COVID stuff with them. So it's a lot of surprises of who's in the top 8 in both conferences and who's not. Thanks for listening to the first half impressions and like surprises and all this other stuff of the NBA season of the 2021 to 2022 season. For On the Radar Tape Blog, I'm Radar. See you guys next time.